Hello, I'm Robert Picardo, and you are watching TrekCulture. How smart you are.
I'll ask you for kind of obviously we're going to talk about it for a bit, but kind of the elevator pitch. But then I want to talk about why now. Why now is it kind of? Do you think it's getting as much kind of traction with the fans?
Uh, well, two words, or rather one name, Scott Bakula. I think people, fans, uh, really want to see Scott return to that character. I mean, it's 100%. I think it's a cool idea for sure, and I've chatted a bit about it over the last couple of weeks. Um, but I think people are just primed to see Scott return to that character. Not because I mean his star has certainly not faded in the 20 years since the show's gone off the air. He was on NCIS for 7 seasons. Clearly, people want to see him back in that role, and clearly there's been a history of bringing back some of the legendary captains in some of the newer shows. And Scott hasn't, I think probably largely because an idea wasn't presented that he was into, but he's also been incredibly busy, and he's still incredibly busy. He's on an off-Broadway production right now, The Baker's Wife. Yeah, I think Scott is really the reason people are primarily interested in this.
And am I understand this correctly? Is that I know there was a pitch before, but and was Scott part of that? Is he like kind of let's say this gets greenlit today? Is Scott
Mhm.
going great? Cool. When do we film? If you can talk about that, I don't want to put anybody on the spot.
Yeah, I mean it's not for me to say. So Scott, as I've mentioned previously, Scott and I, so just kind of go back to the beginning. I was reaching out to Scott. His show NCIS had just wrapped up. NCIS New Orleans had this other project I wanted to talk to him about, and I brought up the idea with him of revisiting Archer. And one of the reasons I brought it up is that the very, very last episode I wrote for Star Trek was In a Mirror Darkly. And one of the sort of last writing assignments I had to do was to write a view screen graphic that at the time I wasn't 100% certain would appear on screen and be visible in the episode, but there was certainly a possibility that it might be visible. Ultimately, it was visible. But this view screen graphic, the characters in the show, the mirror universe counterparts of Archer and Hoshi Sato, were looking at the life and history of their Prime Universe counterparts. So I had to figure out what happened to Archer after the end of Enterprise. And again, we're filming this episode, and I'm writing it just, we've only got like 3 episodes left to go. So I had to, create, or rather, I wanted to create just a suggestion of where his future would go. So one of the details I put in that view screen graphic was that, 25, 30 years after the end of the series in the timeline, Archer becomes president of the United Federation of Planets, which certainly felt, poetic. He was instrumental, as we found out over the course of the series, to the founding of the Federation. The idea that he would then get into this political life and become its president, I just loved it, and it just ended up being, a little fun detail that fans have picked up over the years, and I think Memory Alpha probably, picked up on it as well. So it was kind of out there, and I realized, oh my gosh, when you ask why now, why do this show now? Well, one, Scott, at least then temporarily, had an availability. And it was now, 25 years after Enterprise had started. So the time certainly aligned. If we were ever going to see what happened to Archer, and perhaps, some of the other crew as well, he would now, being the same age as the character, would be president of the Federation. So that's a television series. Certainly there are a lot of templates for that genre, whether you're talking The West Wing or The Diplomat or Homeland to a degree. And when I hit upon that, he was certainly interested. And so we chatted quite a bit about what that would be, because there's only one place you can sell a television show about Star Trek, and that's the Paramount. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense to prepare a massive presentation if they weren't interested in it. So Scott and I worked out with Scott what he would want to see in it. And then I presented kind of like a very brief overview of that to the studio. And they said, they seemed very interested, and we said, let's think about it. And they got back to us a few months later, said they'd given it some serious thought. But there was concern about overlap with one of their upcoming series, and that it would have the same setting. Now, when Scott and I discussed our take on United, the assumption, or at least my assumption, was that it would be set on Earth because that's where we've seen the office of the Federation president, which probably would have been a little problematic regardless, because it's established that, I guess, Paris is where the president's office is. And hey, look, I'd love to shoot a show in Gay Paris. That would be amazing. It seems like an interesting setting for a Star Trek show. So I don't know how well that would have gone over. I don't know that their discussions at the studio went that far. But after they got back to us and said, yeah, I don't think we want to do another Earth set television show right now, thank you very much, I realized, oh my gosh, well, it actually doesn't have to be set on Earth. There's so much about the late 22nd century that Star Trek has just never addressed. There's basically this gap between season 4 of Enterprise and season 1 of Discovery, of literally 101 years, where almost nothing has been established. And so it occurred to me that there was this location that had been mentioned. We'd mentioned it on Enterprise, and certainly the original series, the animated series, had mentioned this planet or planetoid known as Babel, which was this neutral site where negotiations could happen between all these various arguing species. And because it was neutral territory, people wouldn't have a problem being there. In some ways, it was analogous to Washington, D.C., I felt. We could plug in a little bit of real American history, which was a capital city put on swampland where there really had been no town prior. Because that just seemed like a really interesting way to approach it. And in fact, I've done some further thinking, because we mentioned Babel in Enterprise. And I think Kirk, when he describes the planet, he describes it as a planetoid that's codenamed Babel. And later, when on Enterprise, Archer said it was a planet designated as Babel. And I thought, well, look, if it was this neutral site, maybe the only thing they could agree on was like that there was a planet there, that all the different species, the Tellarites, the Andorians, the Vulcans, all had different names for it. And the humans came in and said, we're just going to call it Babel because that's sort of fitting. And the name stuck. And certainly we've seen it on all these star maps on all the various series for all these years, but we've never actually been there. We journeyed to Babel, but we never seemed to arrive. So it seemed like something that had a history going back 60 years, but at the same time was like wide open. What was that place like? So let's set the series there. Let's say in this era, that's where the headquarters, the capital of the Federation had been set up. And that could be a really interesting environment. Plus, it's now a show set in deep space. It's got more parallels to, for instance, say Deep Space Nine, which obviously showed that you didn't need to have your series be about the crew of a starship, and it just seemed like it opened up the premise in a lot of interesting ways. So it's changed since it was presented to Paramount. Plus, at the time, as I understand it, they were sort of pulling back on streaming. They were pulling back on some of the various Trek shows. And I don't know how much appetite there was for another new streaming show. They were winding down so many of them. As I said, the premise has now changed. So whether that would be enough for them to look at this show and say, oh, well, actually, it's totally different from this new show, Starfleet Academy. They're both not set on Earth now. And plus, there's a 1,000 years, if I'm not mistaken, between the setting of Starfleet Academy and what this show would potentially be. So, will they at some point perhaps want to, reconsider? I hear interesting, tidbits as everybody does. I don't have any inside information that they want to expand the footprint of Star Trek on streaming. How soon they may want to do this, anybody's guess. There's at least, there's 4 seasons of the various shows in production and still to air. So I think there's a lot of Star Trek on TV that will continue to be for a while. Is this something they might at some point want to consider doing? I think that would be great. Obviously, it's certainly an idea that for me, after Scott and I had pitched it, it went into a drawer. Quite frankly, I had been thinking about it for a very long time, and it was only at the Vegas convention where I brought it up because I was invited to be a guest on a Star Trek politics panel. And I thought, well, it'd be interesting to talk about this busted pitch. And it just kind of exploded. And I must get, a text, an email, some kind of contact, a new article gets published about the idea. And again, I think this has nothing to do with me. This is about, I think people are ready for Scott to return to that franchise in some capacity. And perhaps this would be the way that could happen. That would be very exciting.
Let's say, do you want to do a movie? Do you think that it's something that could be condensed into a movie? Or, I mean, I suppose, yes, I'd love the work. I don't mean that in a bad way. But you know what I mean? Like, is this something that you feel could be achieved theatrically, perhaps?
It's interesting. I mean, I certainly have ideas for that could be Star Trek features, separate from the idea for United. It's hard to say. I mean, yes, of course you could do that, but so yes, I guess the simple answer is yes, but I think they're going to have to figure out what they want to do. They may already have a lot of ideas. It's hard to know what comes next. I feel like since the original cast and later Next Gen kind of signed off, there's been like a little bit of an open question as to what characters, what stories do you want to tell? Do you simply recast the characters that we all know and love? I think I'll be very interested in seeing what they do next theatrically. And for me, though, Star Trek has generally been it's a television show, and it's about the ongoing adventures. And I think the features, as great as they are, and as often as I watch them and rewatch them over the years, it's a bit of a change from the format, and I think that's why the features more often than not are about saving Earth, saving the Federation, saving Spock. You have to go for these massive stakes, and you don't end up doing as much thoughtful science fiction as the show did. And I think a fatigue can set in. Like, oh my gosh, we're threatening the planet Earth again. Oh my gosh, the Federation's going to be destroyed again. It's not even enough to just threaten the ship, which, certainly in the original series, you could threaten from week to week. It has to be a much bigger threat than that. So it's a challenge, I think, to do Star Trek on the big screen. I think it's fantastic that they want to try and seem to want to do something new. I'll be very interested to see whether they embrace the idea of alternate realities again and alternate timelines, because I think fans are very invested in the Prime universe, and they're interested in the further adventures of other starships, whatever century that's in, 25th, 26th, 32nd. But there are also stories to be told, I think, in those very interesting pockets of history. It's a bit like, there's a United States, but we post Civil War period, you sort of come in and you pick up the tale. And we know everything about the United States from the late 1800s on, but that first century is kind of a mystery. To me, I mean, yes, you want to explore space. That's what Star Trek does. But as a writer, you're looking to explore story. Is there story there? And for me, yes, there is story in that first 100 years of after the founding of the Federation, and watching that transition from a world that's much closer to the one we live in now to that era of Kirk and Picard. I mean, that is drama. That is drama writ large. And on the one hand, I'm sort of astonished they haven't done this story yet. Like you said, I've heard rumors of something perhaps set during the Romulan War, which might be a very exciting Star Trek war picture. But this is about after that. This is about building the peace, which to me, that is a television show. That is a long form novel for television that you can tell. At the same time, finding a middle ground where, yes, you're telling a story that is in many ways serialized, but each episode is its own chapter with a beginning, middle, and an end. And I would want to embrace that element of it as much as possible. I think that's something Strange New Worlds has certainly been pretty successful at, and going back to to that format. Deep Space Nine kind of did it better than anybody. They had their standalone stories, but also their Dominion Klingon war story arcs that went on for many, many seasons. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes next.
You have worked on Trek when it was 26 episodes a season, and now Trek has moved to really kind of 10 episode seasons. Do you think, is there a sweet spot where it works better one or the other?
Well, I don't know that I'd ever want to do 26 episodes again. I mean,
because I keep hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I think there is definitely a sweet spot between 26 and 10 for sure. I mean, I think probably 15 I think would be a good compromise. I worked on shows, my show Perception with Eric McCormick. We did 15, I think most of the seasons. And I think that gives you an opportunity to let your secondary cast shine, to tell stories that might be a little more off topic. I mean, part of it is also, are you telling a 10 episode or 15 episode or 12 episode serialized story where you're just kind of breaking it? Okay, well, we hit an hour mark, so now we're going to roll credits. Or are you telling episodic storylines in that era? Or are you trying to do something in between where you're writing a chapter of this serialized storyline? And it's all about, I think, finding that balance. For me, I think one of the drawbacks when they returned Star Trek to TV and embraced the streaming era is, well, they immediately embrace the idea of serialization. Okay, great. But if you have a serialized story, you need a big threat. Now you're sort of have the problem that the movies have. You need a big threat to sustain a whole season. We did that on Enterprise in season 3. It was the fate of the planet Earth, and Deep Space, certainly the fate of the Federation was on the line with the Dominion War. And it becomes much harder in that scenario to do science fiction because everybody is fighting for their life for 10 episodes, 12 episodes, 15, whatever it is. And I miss that. I miss the science fiction. And it's more difficult. It's more difficult to do when you've got those massive life and death stakes going on. So I think for that reason, and I love stories with big, massive stakes. I did an episode of Enterprise where the Earth blew up in the teaser. But I think a show that can figure out how to tell those other types of stories in that same format is going to have more freedom, because I think ultimately the serialized structure, when applied to Star Trek, is more limiting than you realize. And again, I thought Strange New Worlds did a very nice job by having serialized character stories, but the Adventure of the Week was a bit more standalone.
Hi, I'm Duncan Rillick, no relation, and I collect relics from before the burn. Thanks to a temporal wormhole, I now have an unlimited supply of TrekCulture t-shirts, and I'm selling them to you! You could be wearing this stylish down and up t-shirt. Or, how about this fish watching design? Bright yellow on black, the colors I'd use in thumbnails, I tell you that for nothing. I plan to take these designs and transfer them via quantum duplication onto hats, mugs, and posters. So look out for those. Ah! Treat this unlimited supply as a limited time deal. Get your t-shirt quick. Who's your daddy?
Thank you so much for watching this abbreviated version of this podcast. Now, if you go to our audio platforms, you will get the full version of this podcast with this guest. So we really, really appreciate you subscribing to that, and you're just awesome and wonderful. Thank you so much.